Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. In my home, to talk about a new book that he has written is my friend Haymitch, St. Stephen. Welcome to the podcast, Haymitch.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Those of you that are in Utah may remember the story that happened in February of 2017, the terrible accident with Cameron White being the driver, a 17-year-old senior at a local high school here in Salt Lake City who was drunk and hit Christopher. What's Christopher's?
Williams.
Williams. And in that accident, Christopher's wife, pregnant wife Michelle, and two children, Ben and Anna, were killed. I remember that growing up in Salt Lake City, followed the story closely. Christopher's written a book. I've always wondered how Cameron's doing. Cameron's high school friend, fellow football friend, Haymitch, has written a book about this experience with the permission of Cameron and Christopher, and is here to share that book. When Haymitch sent me a request to be on the podcast and a little bit about the book, I'm trying to do less books and mostly focus on LGBTQ stories, but sometimes the spirit just says, you need to do this story. And as I read through the book and looked at some of the people that Haymitch was quoting, Thomas McConkie, Richard Rohr, Adam Miller, and taking these beautiful gospel authors as well as the doctrine of Christ to bring a book forward that talks about the pain of this experience, but also the healing. It's more than just theoretical. It's taking this really difficult story and bringing perspective that Haymitch has as Cameron's lifelong friend that didn't distance himself during Cameron's darkest days. And so this is a serious book. Let me tell you a little bit about Haymitch. Haymitch grew up in Salt Lake City, played football. Kind of inferred that. Guess you didn't play college or pro, though, because you took a different path.
Yeah.
Graduated from BYU in the ad school there, went on to Stanford, got a master's in education, and then has started let me reference his website, stillpoint.life, STILLPON point.life. And this book you can order this book only there, stillpoint.life, self-published. I think that's the right term. We're also going to mention this podcast will be released before the book launch event on June 7th in Utah. So if you're listening to this podcast and you'd like to go to the book launch event to support this effort, go to stillpoint.life and there'll be information there about the launch event. The name of the book is Friend of the Devil, and I'm going to let Haymitch talk about why he chose that title. But Haymitch has written this. This is a serious guy in his 30s with incredibly bright mind. He reminds me of Thomas McConkie, one of his mentors, Latter-day Saint, and just really a thoughtful approach to bringing the gospel into people's lives, to bring hope and healing and perspective, and just gives me hope for the future of our world and our community when I meet someone like Haymitch. Is that okay for an introduction?
Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing.
Did I get any facts backwards? I sometimes get things backwards. Anything that I said backwards?
No, I think you nailed it.
So I will just turn it over to you. We said a prayer, and I've read most of this book. I've got 100 unwritten books that people have sent, unread books that people have sent me, but you pick up this book and it's hard to put it down. So you are a creative writer and have a gift of writing in a very important story. And so I will turn it over to you to share what you'd like to share, Haymitch.
Thank you so much.
Let me also say one thing I want to say is we will talk about suicide in this podcast. So I'd like to give a trigger warning. If you're suicidal, please call, text, chat 988. The purpose in talking about suicide as part of the book and as part of what Haymitch is doing is to help people that are suicidal, have suicidation, pull out of that space. I think he'll talk about Cameron's own feelings of feeling suicidal given what had happened, and Cameron's ability to get out of that space, which if you're in that space for any reason, I think part of the reason this book exists is to help you. And then I'm sure Haymitch will talk about that on the podcast. All right, I won't interrupt you. You're up, Haymitch.
No, please do. And what a perfect, beautiful interruption just to lead with that I think suicide is real and increasing threat in our community, and I think that really is at the heart of this book is telling Cameron's story in a way that can hopefully be helpful to anyone dealing with mental health challenges, suicidal ideation, or just the weight of having made mistakes. We all make mistakes, and this book is um, our attempt, mine and Cameron's, and Chris as well, his collaboration to leverage their story and their journey as a way of blessing our community, helping our community find healing um, and yeah, feel the love of God deeper in our bones. Um, the book itself came about. Cameron reached out to me. I was looking up some emails to get the dates exactly right, but it was over 6 years ago that we sort of started on this project. So it's been a long time coming, and I'm just thrilled to be able to share it with the world finally. Um, Cameron reached out. We've been close all our lives, and he knew that I was pursuing creative writing in my life and art, and so he reached out and asked if I couldn't meet him for lunch and have a conversation about maybe writing a book. Um, he's been public speaking and on podcasts and things over the years, less and less with time, but at some point he felt like he had a duty to continue to share his perspective and thought that maybe a book would be the best way of continuing to spread a message of forgiveness while also cultivating some anonymity for him and his family and living a quiet life. I think that's one of the most beautiful things I've learned from Cameron is just he doesn't want praise or he doesn't want, undue credit, and he recognizes that this is a sensitive story, and but he's just really taught me humility and um yeah, so we set out to write this book, and at first we didn't know what it would be. We thought maybe it would be just a collection of wisdoms that he had gathered over the years, but pretty quickly we realized the most powerful approach would be to dive into the details of the accident and his story, and then it kind of emerged as a guide for self-forgiveness. Um, and so we've explored in the book, what is self-forgiveness? Is it something that we can even attain? Is it worth shooting for, or is it kind of one of these concepts that's more nebulous? And so it through Cameron's story and Chris's story, I hope that readers um, bring all of themselves to the book and can apply it to whatever they're dealing with in life, whether that's small mistakes, big mistakes, um, you know, mental illness. I in the outset of the book, I something that I learned, a wisdom that really helped me was learning in the New Testament that there are these two words that are often used for forgiveness. And one is something like grace. It's like an unconditional forgiveness that God is always offering us. And the other is more like letting go. It's a conditional forgiveness that's up to us to, line upon line, let go of the things that hold us back from becoming as God is. And so my hope is that for myself and for anyone who's interested in this book, that we can deepen that practice of letting go of the things that hold us back while simultaneously accepting the unconditional love and grace that God is abundantly pouring forth into the universe. I think I even say in the book that might be what God is in some sense, is love embedded in the human system, at least as our human minds can understand it. I don't mean to limit God in any way, but that's one perspective that came about. Um,
I love this. We've done a lot of podcasts. We've maybe touched on self forgiveness at times, but um, part of this, part of the need for, I mean, if there's a story I'm aware of that's sort of public, and at least in our community, of Cameron's White's story as a 17-year-old, drunk driver. And you start the book with a forward from Cameron, a forward from Christopher, and then the first chapter of the book, I think, is called The Accident.
Yeah.
And I like the way you just, for any readers that aren't familiar with the, the story, to just go through the factual parts of the story written from your perspective. I guess you learned about the story the next day
Yeah.
as you woke up, but self forgive. But Cameron, you're going to talk about this, but Christopher forgave Cameron pretty quickly, and I was very aware and just shocked at that.
Yeah.
And but I hadn't thought about Cameron's journey of self forgiveness, knowing that he could never wake up from kind of this nightmare, but he had to get on with his life. Um, and a lot of us, if we're aware of Cameron's story, most of our stories aren't that obviously painful to other people. If Cameron can learn to practice self forgive through, and what you're teaching the book, it helps all of us to know that that's possible for us. And Christ wants to do that for all of us. And if he for if he creates this feeling for you, he doesn't there's not less of it for me. It's not like
Right.
this limited amount of self-forgiveness he can dole out, so only a few get it and the rest of
Mhm.
us just are in this state of not being able to do that. So talk more about that, or wherever you want to go. Hey, Mitch.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, I guess that would probably be a good place to start, especially for people who aren't familiar with the story, or those that are. I find that telling this story, so many people are familiar with it, but I'll just recount some of the details. Um, so when I was a senior in high school, when Cameron and I were seniors in high school, it was February of our senior year, 2007. Um, Cameron had been, yeah, driving drunk and crossed over a lane and crashed into another car. And in that car was the Williams family, Chris and his wife Michelle, and three of their children. Michelle was pregnant at the time as well. Michelle passed away, the unborn baby was lost, and two of the kids died as well. And Chris, the surviving father in that other car, uh, publicly and pretty immediately forgave Cameron. I think it was like the accident happened on a Friday night, and I think it was that Monday there was a press conference where he extended that message, and I still am baffled thinking about that. It's just like I don't even understand what that means. At least my brain, my head doesn't understand what that means. My heart reaches out for that like it's the most important thing in the world. And so it's been an honor to get to be a part of this story and to help share it more broadly. Um, Cameron was detained that night and put in the detention center, and where he stayed for 3 months while the courts prepared for the certification hearing. Um, because he was 17, he wasn't an adult. Uh, it wasn't a trial in the sense that they had to figure out sentencing or like have a jury. It was basically the judge's decision based on the information that was presented from both sides, whether Cameron should be held within the juvenile correction system or given a sentence as an adult in the prison system. And in both cases, it was sort of understood, as far as I understand, that he would have got the maximum sentence either way. As an adult, that would have been something like 67 and a half years in prison, 4 counts of vehicular manslaughter. And in the juvenile system, the maximum sentence is that they keep you until your 21st birthday. And so a pretty dramatic difference in terms of the time that he would have been in the corrections um, process. Um, and he turned 18, I think, pretty soon after the that certification hearing. And so people are charged as adults for much less, so it wasn't a foregone conclusion that he would be tried as a minor, but that's what ultimately happened. And so he got the maximum sentence of being in the juvenile corrections system until he turned 21, basically. And in the book, we dive into some of the details of all of that, of just what is that like as a young man, as a teenager, dealing with those kinds of emotions, that kind of guilt, um, and the things that helped him get through that. He was, even when he was first detained, they put him in, I think they call it the CR, the camera room, and it's basically 24/7 surveillance to make sure you won't kill yourself, and so it's which seems intense. And as his friend, I'm so grateful that that kind of thing is in place, because Cameron has really gone on to live such a beautiful life, and so many moments of challenge that he was able to get through with support, not least of which was Chris's own forgiveness. That's the miracle at the core of this thing, that helped Cameron, especially early on. Um, and it's difficult too, because maybe a lot of us are dealing with situations where we've done something that we haven't been so explicitly forgiven. And I wondered, writing this book, does that mean anyone who doesn't get the same kind of forgiveness Cameron received, are they
Mm.
sort of a lost cause? And I hope the resounding response to that is in the book is a no, that you're absolutely able to find that forgiveness, even if it's not being offered to you so graciously. That forgiveness is really something that, as I see it, God has woven it into the fabric of the human experience, into the universe itself. And it's available to all of us in increasing degrees.
Talk about, you're 17, I think, or 18. So it's interesting. This is 17 years ago. So, Cameron's life is like the halfway point this happened.
Mm,
Both of you have lived half your life since this accident. Talk about, and I want to make sure you do most of the talking, but did you know what that Cameron would want to talk to you? Did you want to be in that space? Because some of us at that age, I remember when a friend's mom died, I just thought my best thing is not to talk to that friend
mm,
and not to ask. And it's a different situation, but my reaction was to pull back and not engage.
yeah.
And it sounds like, and you talk about you served your mission in Germany, you stayed connected to Cameron. And that part of the book is kind of a side story, but it's part of just ministering that I'm going to be present for Cameron.
Yeah.
And I may not know what to say because I've had no priest corps lesson on
Mm,
what to say to my fellow priest corps member. This has just happened, but I'm going to somehow be present as best I can,
mm.
even if that's really uncomfortable. Talk about that part of the story.
Yeah, thank you, for that invitation, because I think it just touches my heart hearing you even bring it up, and remembering. I really give Cameron's parents all the credit here, because a few days after the accident, they came to the high school, to the seminary actually, and gathered, 8 or 10 of us, of his closest friends, in an empty classroom, and just held that difficult space with us, for us. Um, I'm emotional even just thinking about it, because you're right. I think as a 17-year-old, I guess I had turned 18 at that point. Those are difficult emotions for anyone to deal with, especially a young person. And for his parents to meet that head on and just come and gather us and say, "Look, this is what happened, and we're heartbroken." And not, they didn't try and they couldn't fix it if they wanted to, right? It was not about fixing it. It was about sitting in it and allowing us to sit in it with them. And somehow in that communion, in that shared presence, like, God is there, right? Like, it doesn't make it easy. In fact, you know, presencing something, bringing our highest awareness to it, I think makes us feel it even more, but it problematizes it less. It's like feeling the grief that we're meant to feel in this human life. That's what that experience did for me. Um, and so yeah, then staying in touch, writing letters. Cameron was on a different kind of a mission, you could say. It was really interesting that when all of us started coming home from our missions, he had just gotten out of prison, out of juvenile version of prison, and um, he had a wisdom to him. And that was one of the things that I was really curious to explore in writing this book, because I felt like I had changed on my mission, had matured, mostly because it was difficult, it was hard, people didn't want to talk to us, that sort of a thing. But I sensed a maturity about Cameron, a deeper maturity than I could claim for myself. And that fascinated me to know, I think I had a notion in my mind of what a criminal was. Um, and here was my friend breaking all of those barriers, being full of love, being humble, being mature. And so it really was a great opportunity to explore that. When we wrote the book, we would basically meet up for lunch every Friday at noon, and Cameron was so willing. He was open and gracious, and he let me ask him some difficult questions, questions that as a writer I was so curious to know, but as his friend, he would elaborate certain details that just broke my heart, and so it wasn't an easy process, but I felt like there was support, something supporting the process that's much bigger than me or Cameron. Um, and yeah, just to hear him enumerate some of those details, that really became the process of those lunches was, to your point of what is it like as a young person trying to deal with these emotions. I think there was still a lot for both of us to learn about the situation. And so it became this sort of shared therapy session where we were, he was telling me about things, and um, we just got to share that together. And I guess if I had to put a word, maybe God is the word, or maybe in this case another word for God is friendship. Like that's what was holding us, was like our friendship to each other, our love, our relationship. Uh, um like one detail that comes to mind was after the accident, Cameron climbed out of his overturned Jeep, and he had he was still inebriated, so he wasn't thinking straight. He said a thought kept coming back to him, which was find something sharp, and he's thinking, find something sharp. And then he's trying to like, I'm missing a shoe, and where am I, and what just happened? Find something sharp. He's trying to make sense of this. And then he sees a fence post with, sharp ends at the top, and he proceeds to try and cut his wrists open to fade to black, to end his life. And hearing that just broke my heart, to hear my friend talking about like that's what he was experiencing. And but those are some of the details that I think um, make the story that much more incredible. To realize that when Chris offered forgiveness, it paved a path for Cameron to begin walking that would ultimately lead to healing.
It's really tender space. And I'm remembering a line, if I remember it right, in the car when Christopher Williams realized that people had died in his car at the hands of another driver. Let it go was a phrase that came to his mind, if I remember that correctly. I also remember you writing the book, and you didn't excuse what Cameron did. You didn't say like this was okay some way, or so it's not like you. but you also humanized what was going on in his life a little bit with football and some of the challenges that all of us just face. And I call that sometimes the bottom of the iceberg. And sometimes we do things at the top of the iceberg that we can see in ourselves and others, like drinking.
Mm,
And to really understand, we have to understand in ourselves and others what's kind of at the bottom of the iceberg. And often a therapist or better mental health approaches can deal with the bottom of the iceberg stuff that he was going through.
mm,
It didn't make it okay that he was drinking or driving. So
right.
you were really careful there, but you did. And I think it makes me want to look at people in the criminal system a little bit more with the lens that you brought, that at the bottom of their iceberg, might be a really good person
Mm,
who's, because of the situations of their lives, they're dealing with stuff, the top of the iceberg stuff, and they're dealing that often in a way to escape that's not healthy and can cause harm to others. So I love that you humanized him for us that don't know him personally, because I think that's the way God feels about Cameron.
mm.
And I think that's the way Christ, the doctrine of Christ, would teach about Cameron and everybody i- on the face of the earth. So keep sharing.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I that reminds me just to put a plug in for the book that Chris wrote by that same title, Let It Go. In 2012, I think that book came out, and it's really just a beautiful, um, oh yeah, I mean, a masterpiece, really. Just and Chris has demonstrated profound humility too, in saying that any, and he mentioned this to Cameron when they met, that anything he had seen or heard of him about the forgiveness, he wanted Cameron to know that it was merely the Savior working through him, right? And that it wasn't anything that he was doing, and that kind of humility is just so divine. I just and Yeah, and that was the voice that came to Chris um after the accident happened. Is just a He said it wasn't a still small voice, but it was sort of a commanding voice of invitation to let it go. Um so yeah, I stand in awe of that. And yeah, to explore maybe some of the details, the perspective I had as Cameron's friend growing up, I don't want to try and excuse anything that happened. I don't think Cameron would want that either. Um, but seeing him, our friendship goes back years before the accident. We played little league sports together, and I spent a lot of time at his home growing up. He spent time, with my family, and um, I can remember in junior high school when there began to be a heaviness to him that I didn't understand. Um, Now I can see it so clearly as anxiety. Like I'm so glad that we've talked more and more about this in our culture over the years, but and we could do so even more. But back then it was like that wasn't even a word. Anxiety and depression, I don't think those were words that I would have even known what they meant. It was probably about 8th or ninth grade when I really started to sense a separation or a distance between us. Not like anything had happened or that, that there was bad blood, but just I sensed that Cameron um didn't feel, I mean, it's hard to even know if this is language I have now or that I understood then, but from my perspective now, I can see that he didn't love himself, that he was deeply anxious, um, and dealing with all sorts of mental health challenges. And yeah, on top of that, sports, football in particular, was a big deal for us growing up. That was sort of what we did, and um, that became a great source of anxiety for Cameron as well. that like the thing that he loved most, he wasn't finding the success that he had hoped for, you know? And, um, and that's how when I think of, young Cameron, I think of one of the most talented athletes that I ever knew. He had a kinesthetic intelligence about him that he moved his body in an athletic way. Still to this day, he's very fit and athletic, and I learned from him a great deal to this day about those things. Um, but yeah, football became a great source of anxiety, and he started to use alcohol and smoke weed and use these things as a way of numbing the pain and also trying to find love and acceptance. One thing he told me that was a big regret of his after the accident was that he didn't try harder to see the love and support that was already in his life. And it's hard to know, like, if he ever would have been able to. Sometimes it takes a dramatic happening or an accident in our life for us to realize that there's been people loving and supporting us all along. So I think that's how Cameron feels about or felt about, his family and his friends trying to be supportive, but he wasn't quite connecting to that love and support. And and it was also interesting to learn that, it was pretty from his perspective, pretty normal for a young person drinking alcohol to drive home at the end of the night. So you think how many hundreds or thousands of people have made the same choices he made and not led to those same dramatic consequences. But for whatever reason in this situation, it did. It brought the heaviest of consequences. And yeah, so again, I offer none of that as way of excusal, but maybe explanation. If there's someone, you or someone in your life, that's dealing with mental health challenges, um, trying to get really clear with that person and open with that person and share love and support and try and try and talk about it and discuss it so that it doesn't get covered up, you know, by something else.
I love the insights about mental health and normalizing those conversations. And I think I wish as a father I'd created it. I think we were okay about mental health, but I wish I'd been pragmatic and just said, this is the way, if you open up about anxiety, suicidal ideation, any of these mental health issues, this is how we will respond as parents.
Mm,
And then go that road with them. And so
yeah,
they just know that I am a safe person. Obviously, I wish you know, I just, you know, I just think we need to be able to do that better culturally because just a normalized mental health challenge is just like a football player in high school is going to have ouches.
right.
I dodged all those on the golf team at Highland High, so I didn't ever have to worry about long term health issues because of a football career. But we normalized broken bones and all that stuff. And I wish we did the same with healthcare. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of your ministry, Haymitch. I love this line that you quote. Well, you wrote a chapter. I won't read all these chapters, listeners, because the book is terrific. But Let It Go, Juvenile Detention Center. Now I am reading them. The certification hearing, Wasatch, suicide. I want you to come back to
Yeah.
that chapter. Meeting Chris, The Worth of Souls is great. Treasured Forgiveness, A Beginner's Mind, Love, Something's Great, Forgive versus Forget, Freedom, Friendship, Three Final Thoughts. So these are short chapter titles, which I think is part of your gift of writing, is you can put few words down that then create big ideas and big thoughts. But in this chapter about suicide, you quote Adam Miller.
Mm,
The body of Christ isn't strong because it has no weakness. The body of Christ is strong because it's a place where weakness is shared.
yeah.
And that really resonated with me. Sometimes in church culture, it's really hard to create that, where it's just not a place where you can sometimes create that. But for some of the members of our congregation, they need that safe place to talk
Mm,
about the realities of their life, or in a family circle, in a friendship circle.
Mm,
And so you're doing things to create, that weaknesses is not a sign of weakness.
yeah.
Vulnerability is the sign of strength. We will talk about it. So there's a few thoughts out there. Just go wherever you want to go next.
Yeah. What that brings up for me first, I suppose, is yeah, I guess to come back to the one of the points I make in the introduction to the book, um, one of the key sort of learnings that I had that, there's many, but one that I wanted to point out was that this story and my life in general have continued to teach me that I think mental health is actually a doorway to spiritual awakening. That not only is it not a weakness, it's potentially a great strength and a great spiritual opportunity. And there's I've loved the work by Dr. Lisa Miller from Columbia University on this, that, through MRIs and other scientific methods, they've really been gathering, scientific evidence to support this idea that um, mental health is a uh, perceptual sensitivity, what's perceived as anxiety and depression. These things can be approached as developmental opportunities, sensitivities to shedding an existing ego structure and moving into something greater. Um, as you read the headings of the chapters, I'm reminded that sort of a bizarre experience I had when I was writing the outline for the book was wanting to frame it as a hero's journey. And Cameron, I think he even writes in his intro that he's the villain of this story,
Yeah, he
right? And
did.
he doesn't shy away from that at all. So I was a little bit confused why I would feel inspired to follow the hero's journey for a villain story, but it was such a beautiful teaching for me as I went through the book that um, his story mapped perfectly onto that same journey. That the broken among us, um, God sees them as heroes just as much as anyone. Um, and that chapter on suicide comes, I think it's chapter 8. That comes right at that crux of the hero's journey, where it's um, deep in the belly of the well. It's the darkest point in the journey, and um, I tried to frame the book in a way where that set up the beauty of Chris coming into the Wasatch Detention Center to meet Cameron face to face for the first time. That was about 2 years after the accident. So Cameron had had 2 years of corrections and therapy and journaling and also a lot of suicidal ideation. Um, he'd really been on the journey, and his therapist, who was constantly trying to help him dig into empathy for the Williams family. That was sort of the core of his therapy. Um, his therapist suggested, for you to really atone here, and you need to meet with the Father, and that's a mixed metaphor there, that like in the hero's journey, as it maps onto Christianity, it's that atonement with the Father, right? With God. And in this case, it was Cameron at Wanting with Chris Williams. And to Chris's great credit, I can't say enough good about the man. He was willing to come with his full heart, and to meet Cameron face to face and to tell him how he was feeling 2 years after the accident, and not to pull any punches and not to sugarcoat anything, but to be raw and to be honest, but to do so with love and presence. And um, Cameron did his best to receive that and to let that change him and transform him. And Yeah, so that was an important sort of turning point in the book where I think Cameron really started to believe that he could live a life beyond this accident, or a life that included this accident, but that also had hope for the future, that he could move into, um, the space of going to college and getting married and having children, having a career and just living a regular human life. Um, yes. Yeah, it's just interesting that you read those. That's what I'm reminded of as you read those, uh, the titles of the various chapters, and um, the hero's journey really kind of ends with the hero becoming the master of their own domain and becoming anonymous. Really, sort of bringing the treasure, in Cameron's case, the treasure of self forgiveness, sharing it with the world. That's sort of the great hope of this project, and in many ways of Cameron's public life, is to share the invitation that self forgiveness is always available to all of us. Um, Hopefully, this book allows him greater anonymity, just to live a quiet, regular life while still stepping up to the plate and doing his part to um, share the story as much as he can.
That I did skim that chapter, meeting Chris, and that's just a tender moment in humanity where these two men are meeting. And I was reading some of the notes that Chris had written. He wanted to be, like you said, honest, but he also didn't want to do anything to set back Cameron's progress.
Right.
Um, just so much love there and so much thinking there on both parts of those men to make this healthy for both of them, but not just sort of a glossing over the reality of what happened.
Yeah.
And I think it needed to be real to be able to move on for both. Move on may not even be the right word because you can never move on. Um, you may have better vocabulary. It's just to accept the reality of the situation and move in a way that's healthy for both people.
Mm.
Um, so that was very insightful, and it gave me insights into, just tools in this book. If we have people in our lives we're sideways with, or if we haven't practiced self forgiveness, or even if others won't forgive us, we still need to forgive ourselves. That's one of the things I love about your writing is you're taking this very obvious, painful story and applying gospel principles and wonderful um, people with great thought leadership in this space to give us all tools to be able to do this in our lives. And those that are suicidal to not be suicidal. You've had a couple friends, high school friends, die by suicide. I know one of those families. I know a younger son, younger brother through our son of one of the families. I don't know the young man who died, but I sense one of the reasons you want to write this book is to help other people that are feeling suicidal be able to work through that. Do you want to talk more to just what you would say to somebody that is suicidal right now?
Yeah, I mean, I should qualify anything I say with it. I'm not a licensed or
Same.
trained
Ne-
therapist.
Neither of us are, so that's a good.
Yeah, but I think that paints an important picture that even though we're not trained or licensed in that being finding the courage in ourselves to bring it up is important. And so I guess anyone who's feeling that way, if I can reach out through this podcast and just ask you to ask yourself, like, to be honest and say, are you suicidal? And for you to try and find that space within you where you can answer honestly. And if the answer is yes, to express that yes to the people in your life and just tell people, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling suicidal. Um, so that uh, that conversation, I think, is the first avenue through which love and healing can reach you. Um, Again, it's um, baffling to me the forgiveness that Chris offered Cameron. Most of us aren't lucky to have that kind of a, well, you again using the hero's journey terminology, supernatural aid, right? We don't have that kind of lightning strike in our life where someone explicitly and offers us that kind of um, forgiveness or healing. Um, but I would say to anyone feeling consumed by thoughts of darkness, suicide, that I promise you the help is available, that there is a brighter day. Um, it's been hard to make sense of, yeah, of my closest friends from high school. Two died by suicide before the age of 30. Cameron would have been a third, if he had succeeded in one of his attempts to take his own life. And that's just too many, one is too many. And maybe it's coming through even as I'm stammering through my response, that it's, you never know what to say. I never know how to broach the subject. And that's where I think that the uh, finding courage within ourselves, whether we're the ones suffering or the ones um, in a position where we're related to someone suffering. I think that those two categories might be all of us, right? We're either in pain or we know someone in pain. And be the first one to reach out and either express how you're feeling or ask how the person is feeling, and don't necessarily try and fix it right away. Just be in it together. I love the word compassion. As I understand it, it literally means, co-suffering or to suffer with. And that's one of the greatest teachings, maybe the greatest teachings I've learned from Jesus, is that, I can't fix everything. I can't I can't fix anything really, but I can choose to suffer with those that are suffering. And just that posture towards life has been such a teacher and such a blessing in my life. It's opened my eyes. Again, it's not always easy. Um, I love in our tradition um, something I've learned from my teachers. You mentioned Thomas McConkie, but this idea of contraries and polarities. And it's my experience that the deeper we're able to feel the pain and sorrow of the world, the greater our joy. And um, so I would just invite, yeah, anyone feeling that pain to look forward to the new heights of joy that you might reach.
It's really a thoughtful answer. Hope I can articulate this question. It's kind of a question for Cameron, but I think you can answer it for him the way he would answer it. But some might be listening and saying, I don't deserve to live. I don't
Mm,
deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to have a family. I don't deserve to have a career because of what's happened.
mm,
We know, obviously, Cameron's story, what happened, but there may be listeners that are thinking, really, whatever happened, it's really, really bad that I'm responsible for, whether it's a legal issue or not, or just whatever it is. I don't deserve to be happy. I don't deserve to
mm,
live my life. It's not, it's not right. And talk to that person. It's you talking what Cameron would say to that
mm,
person, because Cameron is living his life. And
mm.
I think God would want him to do that. I think it's part of self forgiveness. And I think the Williams family, can't speak for the whole Williams family, would want him to do that.
Yeah.
But talk to people that get in that headspace where I don't deserve anything.
Mm. You know, what comes up for me is to say that none of us do, you know?
That's a good answer.
Because to earn it or deserve it would be to presume that we've done anything to create life. You know, I think we're starting from a place of givenness. Life is given to us. We wake up in a body and we didn't do anything to earn that or deserve that. So to someone who's feeling like they don't earn or deserve happiness or life, it's like, welcome to the party, you know? And what a great realization. And from that point, together, let's move into compassion. Let's find those among us that are feeling that way, and let's feel it together, and let's let that crack us open over and over again until we just stay open, you know, until we are, you know, uniquely individual expressions of God's divine love. Um, yeah.
I that's a
It's a
really
short answer, I suppose.
it's a good answer. I was kinda looking for something at 10,000-foot level, and you took us to the 30,000-foot level, which was great.
Mm.
It was just great. Other things you just feel impressed you'd like to share?
Yeah, you know, I'm so grateful for you, Richard, and for you being willing to have me on this podcast. And um, I just feel a great sense of joy. You know, I think this is a very um, can be a very somber conversation, and I think that's necessary, at least in part. Um, but I guess I'm just aware too of and I hope I've done this in the book, that while the book starts out heavy and somber and it's very real and raw, um, I hope by the end of reading the book that someone would feel joy, you know, like they're just expansive and full and growing. Um, to reference that polarity again, I just think that like the deeper we feel the pain, it becomes our inheritance to feel the joy in equal and opposite measure. And um, so I guess that I would just want to package everything we're saying with, you know, this is really a hopeful story. It's really a joyful story. It's painful, yes, as is life. But I think Chris's example and Cameron's example have taught me that forgiveness is a practice of joy. Um, I on the dedication page of the book, as you pointed out, I use this quote from Richard Rohr, who's been a great teacher of mine over the years. That, you know, as he sees it, that the whole gospel really boils down to forgiveness. You know, that he says that's the beginning, that's the middle, that's the end of the gospel is forgiveness, and that uh, you know, that someone who's been forgiven knows how good it feels, not when they deserved it, but precisely when they didn't deserve it. And I'm just grateful for that perspective and that wisdom. Um, that whatever we're dealing with, you know, mistakes and mental health and self forgiveness, that all of it really is a practice of joy, and that these are life is the curriculum for becoming as God is, you know, and it's from our small selves, from our human perspective, that's not always easy or pretty. Um, but if we can remember that we are on the hero's journey, that we're on the path towards becoming something beyond great, um, that really helps me to package all of the pain and suffering and to hold it from a larger perspective.
Just really wonderful thoughts, and I've circled a lot of things you've said here. This is a mental health is the doorway to spiritual awakening. That is a great title for a church talk,
Yeah.
for discussion. I agree with that. I wouldn't have ever thought that idea 10 or 15 years ago. And the other thing that I it there's no shame. It's sort of the opposite of shame in that statement. That
Yeah.
this is a good thing. Mental health is the doorway to spiritual awakening. And it gives purpose for I've seen a therapist twice in my life. I've mentioned that in a podcast in one of the books I wrote. And I remember never feeling that way. Once it was when I was a YSA bishop, and I was glad that my therapist was on the other side of town. So none of the YSAs would see this strong, capable priesthood leader.
Yeah.
I had at least the courage to go get some help.
Mm.
um, but I never would have thought, and then I might have talked about it
Mhm.
for the YSAs in an appropriate situation to normalize it within our congregation, so that they might have also gotten um, professional help if they needed it, because I had the courage to be vulnerable enough.
Mm.
So I love the discussion around mental health and the way you framed it as the doorway to spiritual awakening. And maybe in some ways that helped me, that maybe there was some increased spiritual awakening as I was more aware of who I am. I love your feelings about joy.
Mm.
And I love that it's not you haven't created this transaction to get to joy, that it's just there
Yeah.
because God, you haven't said it quite this way, but this is the way I've heard you kind of infer is it's just there for us.
Yeah.
It doesn't come at the end of a long list of checklist things. It's there.
Yeah.
And this loving God wants all of us to feel joy. And there's not like a scarcity of that.
Mhm.
Just like the atonement, there's not a scarcity of forgiveness or self forgiving. So that we should never think, well, if Christ is going to forgive me, or I'm going to give or through his atonement, I can feel self forgiveness, that I'm adding to his burden or taking that away from other people. That's not part of our doctrine, listeners. So I love part of this story. I've shared this before a little bit, but I remember for those of you that heard this story, there was one of our YSAs that served in Afghanistan and knew that innocent people had died in his bombing missions, and he was pretty broken up about that.
Mm.
And he knew he was doing what was asked of the government, so there was no issue there. But from just his good heart perspective, he wondered how to reconcile this. And
Yeah.
as I laid my hands on his head, I had no idea what Heavenly Father wanted me to say to him. But then the thought came into my mind in the words that no one's eternal possibilities have changed because of what happened in Afghanistan.
Mm.
And he sort of brought me to the 40,000 foot level, the plan of salvation, or the 50,000 foot level, where, yeah, mortality changed.
Mm.
We're not going to like ignore that, you
Right.
know, just like mortality changed for the Williams family. We're not
Yeah.
going to ignore that. Elder Cook talks about songs unsung when he talks about the Titanic sinking,
Mm.
and a nurse that had training in Europe and was coming back on the boat for the sole purpose of blessing people, I believe, in Provo with her increased training. And her song was never going to be sung. She went down in the boat. And how do we reconcile that? So mortality is brutal. It's wounding. It's the middle of a 3 act play. And sometimes you get, like I got in this blessing, just a little bit of the 40,000 foot level. And maybe that's my hope, in this story for those that wonder, well, what about the pain of lives that didn't live into adulthood, and things that forever changed? And I don't know all the answers to that, but I know that we can just Latter-day Saint tradition has a place for that
Mm.
in our plan of salvation, and that no one's eternal possibilities have changed because of what happened in that underpass. And I share that because we all have these underpass brutal experiences. I'm referring, of course, to the Williams accident under that underpass of I-80, I believe. But there's just all this woundedness that comes into mortality that's not, it can be criminal. Doesn't mean it's intentional. I think it's pretty clear that um, Cameron didn't, with intent, say, this is what I'm going to do tonight, but he's still criminally responsible for what happened, and he owned that. But it's a wounded mortality, and it's just the reality of life. And I think the atonement can heal our broken hearts for ourselves if we're wounded, or if we've caused the wounding, and help us give self forgiveness And in our plan of salvation, we can have context for no one's eternal possibilities of change because of what's happened, because we have loving parents, heavenly parents that have a plan. Any thoughts on that? Is that okay? I don't want to make this my story in the middle of
No,
your
that's
book. Is it?
yeah, that's beautiful, and it reminds me that I never answered the question about or the comment you made about why I chose the title I
Yeah.
did.
Oh, that's a good one. Come back to that one.
Yeah, so, I'm a big Grateful Dead fan, and there's a song called "Friend of the Devil" that I love, and it's sort of this tale about a guy on the run, you know, and that became an interesting metaphor for me because I think that's how I used to relate to my own self-forgiveness, is I just tried to outrun it.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't until, this project, which has, been going on for the last 6 years, so I've had time to really practice this, but that I came to this realization that I think a better framing than outrunning my pain and my mistakes is befriending the inner devil. That part, and by that I mean that part or those many parts of us that we feel are unlovable or imperfect. It's as if the devil itself has taken up real estate in us. That's how it can feel sometimes anyway. But I've learned from this story and from other, great teachers in my life that the way to transform something is to love it, And so even if it's something that feels devilish inside of me, trying to push that down or push that away, it's just more resistance. It's just more sort of devil nature. But love, which could be maybe defined as the power of God or the essence of God, love is what fills those holes in our hearts. And in my experience, that's when I feel like I'm becoming like Christ, is when I turn towards that part of me that I don't love, and I try and bring my awareness to it and eventually bring love to it, and thereby, allow God to heal me from the inside out. Um, I put another, maybe it's a, I don't know how people will relate to this, but I put it in the book, so I guess it's out there that I've actually started to think that we have the authority to forgive ourselves. I know that can sound controversial. I don't mean that we don't need help. Certainly, we always need more help. We always need each other. But I guess I just mean that when we can tap into that joy that you mentioned is already always here. It's overflowing with abundance. That that's like when Jesus teaches as one having authority. Jesus mastered that like relationship with God. And so as we learn to master that same relationship, we heal ourselves, we forgive ourselves. And um yeah, just I hope this book can be a nudge for all of us in that direction.
I'm comfortable with that. I think sometimes we're our own worst critic and we're the last person to forgive ourselves. So I love the idea that, if we have this great relationship with God and understanding the atonement, that we can often do what you just invited us to do. I would think God would like that.
Yeah.
Christ has already paid the price. And so I think when we do that and we get in a better spot emotionally, spiritually, headspace, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't think you're saying eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow we can forgive ourselves. You're not
Right.
going, and I don't think there's any, I'm not kind of joking there. So I think we're still just doing the best we can, but you had a couple phrases in that last segment is I'm out trying to outrun myself,
Yeah.
you know, and sort of not acknowledging what's going on. So I'm staying busy. I'm sort of, whatever I need to do, but you're inviting us to kind of sit with who we are,
Yeah.
the devil of the friend of the devil,
Yeah.
to reference that song in the title of your book, and being comfortable with those parts of ourselves that we may intuitively or as a I'm not a therapist we're trying to outrun versus sit with them. Often those things that we're not very pleased about ourselves or how we're created. And
Yeah.
God's not doesn't feel that way. They're just who we are.
Right.
And that doesn't take growth off the table or but it allows us just to be at peace. No one should feel shame for who they are and how they feel. Um, and then I love you this other phrase you used, heal from the inside out.
Mm.
That's a really thoughtful way to look at just personal growth and dealing with stuff. Um, I'm gonna one of the quotes I use a lot in this podcast is Henry Norwin,
Mm.
the Wounded Healer book you probably are familiar with. But a minister's service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which he speaks. The great illusion of leadership is to think that others can be led to the desert by someone who's never been there. So Chris and Cameron know they're different deserts, but
Mm.
they're really painful deserts. And because they're both willing to talk about it, we'll link to Let It Go in our show notes, um, Christopher's book. But since both these good men are willing to talk about these incredibly wounding experiences, they can bring hope and healing to others. And you, as an author, are doing that in the case for Cameron, sharing his story and your insights. We're all wounded, listeners, um, but we heal each other as we sort of reach out for each other and help each other. Um, that's part of mortality. Other thoughts you'd like to say in closing? Anything that comes to your mind? Hey, Mitch?
No, I'm just feeling God's love in this moment, in all its facets. Call it joy, call it pain, call it life. I just feel I just feel God's presence, and again, grateful to be able to share this time with you, Richard, and with the listeners.
So thank you, Hey Mitch St. Stephen, for being on the podcast. If you want to find him, we're just going to link to stillpoint.life in the show notes. That's where you can get to Hey Mitch. You can get to the book. You can get to the launch party if you want to come to the launch party in Utah, launch event, whatever it's called, on June 7th. And that would be, and then you can obviously get the book at stillpoint.life. And we'll also link in the show notes to Chris' book, Let It Go. Thank you, friends, for listening and making this podcast possible. You listeners that listen and share this, but especially for the guests, you're the real heroes of this podcast. It's kind of this vulnerable, real, authentic space that I'm honored to host here and make these conversations possible. So this is Haymitch and Richard signing off another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.